Let's go ahead and get started here today. We are so glad to have you with us in this installment of our Who Not How webinar series. My name is Kate Norton, and I am the client strategist at Vision Spark. We have a ton to get to today, and we are so excited to have a special guest with us. So let's go ahead and hop right in. You can catch us every quarter chatting about how to gain leadership experience and improve entrepreneurial freedom with our three dream team members. So let me get started with introducing them. We've got Shannon Waller, who is the director and teamwork coach at Strategic Coach. We have Alec Broadfoot, the visionary and CEO at Vision Spark, and then Emily Morgan, who is the founder and visionary at Delegate Solutions. And none other than our very, very special guest, Dr. Ben Hardy. So we're so excited to have Dr. Ben Hardy here today. He's actually hot off the press with a new book that just launched, The Gap and the Gain. So not only is he a best-selling author, which Shannon has some awesome news to share with us today, but not only is he a best-selling author, but he's also an organizational psychologist and seems to have time to be a father of 6 as well. So lots to cover today. Just a couple pieces of housekeeping before we get going. We are going to have time for a Q&A session at the end. So as we're going through here, if you have any questions, go ahead and put those in the chat and I'll be monitoring those and we'll be able to throw out a few. And also, I believe we have a couple books, right, Shannon? I think we have about 5 books to give away. So stay tuned all the way to the end and we will be giving a few of those away. I think that's it on my end. So I'm going to toss it over to Shannon and let's get started.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Kate. This is so fun. We've been having these who not how conversations for a while now. And then it was like, okay, we're like, this has been a great conversation because who not how is such a powerful teamwork strategy that we all appreciate. And then Ben, you came also out this a few weeks ago, last week, 2 weeks ago, with the gap and the gain. And that applies so much to how we work with our who's. So super excited that we can actually talk about both of these things today. So I'm going to actually kind of walk you through the strategic coach concept of the gap and the gain. And then we have our fabulous author who's going to go into some detail. So you will see the cover of this book. And by the way, yesterday it was the #1 nonfiction bestseller on Amazon, which I am completely stoked about. And obviously it's awesome to have a successful book, which is really thanks to Ben. But more importantly, this book will make such a difference for people. Ben, actually, I think you're going to share a story of what the impact for some people of listening to the audiobook is just profound. And as you'll see, the subtitle is The High Achiever's Guide to Happiness, Confidence, and Success, because so many people are really successful, but don't feel it. They feel stuck. They feel trapped. They feel like they're never good enough. They're just unhappy. And then that bleeds over onto other people. And since all of us work with entrepreneurs, that's who's on our webinar today, this is you. So we're going to talk about the gap and the gain and how you can get out of it. And then Ben's going to share some of his experiences too. So I'm all excited about how the gap and the gain and who not how work together. So by the way, gapandthegainbook.com, go check that out. Sorry, Emily, let's go back for 1 second. Ben will mention this, but I wanted to sneak it in too. It is 99 cents this week on Amazon. So I know I bought the Kindle, I've got the hardcover, I bought the audiobook. We'll start listening tonight because I can't wait to see the interview with you and Dan, Ben. But go grab it and you can gift it. It's like the best thing you can do for your colleagues and your friends and your family is to share this idea. So anyway, let me introduce you to it and then you'll know more of what I'm talking about. So let's go through the thinking process that everyone experiences, every human that I've ever talked to. First of all, there's your brain. Okay, this is how you look at things. So all of us, if you click the next slide, Emily, we really have a particular way of looking at what our future is going to be like in a lot of cases, because we have ideals. If you think about it, you can go back one, Emily. We've got ideals about family. We've got ideals about what we look like, what our weight is, how our relationship with our kids, how our kids are growing up to be. Lots of children on this particular panelists' families. So we have ideals and we set goals to move ahead of them. But the problem is what we do is we measure ourselves against the ideal. And the ideal, a relationship to the ideal, is a lot like a relationship with horizon. You can run real fast, can't get there. Even if it's dark outside, you can't get to the horizon. Why? Because it's a mental construct. It's our brain's way of coming to grips with where the earth meets the sky. But as you try to move towards it, what happens? It moves further away. And that's what the ideal does. Because the ideal is usually better health, happier relationship with our families, skinnier, whatever it is, but it's often not super measurable. Or if you thought, oh, I thought that was what I wanted, but what I really want is this. And when you're constantly measuring yourself against the ideal, you are always in what we call the gap. And the gap plays out into some pretty unhappy and negative emotions. So next slide, Emily. And you'll know this. Anytime you have a sense of failure, frustration, disappointment, a sense of low self-esteem, don't feel like you're doing what you're supposed to, guilt, you're blaming yourself. That's what guilt is. It can, even if it's chronic, lead to depression. And this is kind of sad, especially if it's long-term and entrenched. And the really interesting thing is high achievers live here. And they don't only spend moments or minutes or hours, they can spend days and months and sometimes years, just never feeling good enough. Although to the outside, they look like they're rocking it. They look pretty fabulous. So this is the gap. Okay. Raise your hand to yourself if you've ever experienced the gap. Yeah, exactly. I'll tell you a fun story about Dan. But there's an alternative. Now, if you take a look at this model, you'll notice the colors are slightly different for reasons. So next, thank you. So the same thing. We have where we are, okay, our starting point. We have our ideals. Those don't go away. They're powerful. They inspire action. They're powerful. They inspire goals. They allow us to withstand periods of difficulty and hardship. They're motivating. Ideals are important. The difference is how you measure. So what we talk about is really measuring yourself against the goal and tracking and celebrating your progress towards that. So your ideal is out here, if I go this way, but what we want you to do is turn around and go, where did you come from? It's a little bit like being on a cruise ship, and you get on the boat, and then you wave goodbye to people, and it pulls away from the dock. You hear the horn, and then you're at the front of the boat and you're like, I thought we were leaving. It's been 10, 15, 20 minutes, and then you walk to the stern and you can't see shore. Didn't feel like you were going very fast, but in fact, when you turn around and look, you actually did. So when you're measuring your progress, not perfection, there's a sense of success, satisfaction, confidence, high self-esteem, enjoyment of life, and your sense about the future is not one of pessimism or depression, but one of optimism. You are looking forward to it because you know there's more progress to be had. So this is the gain. So this is the very essential gap and gain concept, and Ben's going to share a little bit more about it. But this is how we live. This is how we think. And so one, it's interesting. It's great to know this. And this came out of, by the way, a workshop, the stories in the book. But a client came in, just had one of the biggest wins of his career, and he was complaining about the lack of progress. And Dan actually got mad. And Dan doesn't get mad very often. He went to the flip chart, because that's what we were using at the time, and he drew this head. We called it Mr. Potato Head at the time. And he drew this model. It just came to him because he realized this client who experienced a ton of success was actually in the gap and not in the gain. So someone said to Dan the other day, Dan, you must just never go in the gap anymore. He goes, no, not more than 4 or 5 times a day. So the point is not to never go in the gap. The point is, how fast can you get out? And that is by measuring progress. So that is the gap in the gain concept. But Ben, you have spent months and months and months in the Strategic Arch program and writing the book about it. So I'd love you to share some of your thoughts, insights, experience of writing the book, because it's not an easy book to write, that's for sure. And this is a chance for our audience to really kind of get to know you a little bit and get to know the pen behind the book. So
yeah, absolutely. I will say it's kind of fun. My wife homeschools our older 3 kids, And this is the first book where she's made it required reading. Like my wife sometimes, she'll read my books. She didn't ever read any of my old blog posts, but the only reason she reads my books is because I have her, like we go line by line, and she's a really good thinker. And so she helps me get them clear and make sense. But it's kind of funny. Our older 3 kids are now reading The Gap and the Gain, and they're writing little book reports on it. It's kind of fun. But just to kind of emphasize why I thought that this was such a great concept. So I read Dan's little version of The Gap and the Gain sometime in 2018. And I was just kind of learning about Dan Sullivan at the time. I may have known about him, but I started reading his little books that he has. And I was just cruising through his little books, and I just read The Gap and the Gain, and it just hit me like a ton of bricks. And I wrote a blog post about it. That blog post was very successful. I wrote many blog posts about it, honestly. But it was just one of those ideas that, yeah, that little book right there, that was what I read. And that little thing became this thing now. But it's funny how things transform. But I just knew it was important. Like in psychology, probably the most famous model, I guess you could say, that's come out of psychology in the last 20 years is this one right here. Carol Dweck's mindset book, where she wrote about fixed mindset versus growth mindset. Like we've all heard it a million times. It's the most famous model that's come out of psychology, but I honestly think that this model is more valuable. Either you're in the gap mindset or you're in the growth gain mindset. But just to share my perspective on it very slightly, like my view is that every person is probably, you're either measuring yourself against an ideal or you're measuring your situation against an ideal. So like you can see the gap everywhere. Like Dan, I see myself in the gap all the time. And whenever you're in the gap, you're unhappy. You devalue what you have, you devalue your progress, etc. And you can do it in any situation. Like as an example, and I talk about my own kids, like my wife brings them dinner and they're like, oh, it's not pizza. Like, so they're measuring like what's on the table against pizza, and the pizza is their ideal in this case. And so now whatever's on the table doesn't really matter. Like they've devalued it. And so we're always measuring ourselves against something. But if you measure the gain, obviously you're going to do a lot better. And that really leads you to having intrinsic motivation. It leads you to running your own race. And so I guess I'll share, and then Shannon, you ask me whatever you want, but I think my two favorite things that have come out of the gap and the gain for me personally are now that I do measure myself backward. Like the only person that Benjamin Hardy is measuring himself against is Benjamin Hardy last week, last month, last year. And I'm just measuring my progress. I'm measuring my gains. I'm measuring my learning. What that helps me do is it helps me not really worry about what anyone else thinks about me. It helps me just think about my own thinking rather than thinking about other people's thinking, honestly. So I just am a lot more at peace with myself, and it allows me to set goals that are intrinsically motivating to me rather than worrying about what anyone else is doing. So it just creates peace, it creates confidence, it creates motivation. But the other huge aspect that I really wanted to make sure went into this book, which is not in the mini book, but it's a big concept that Dan talks about, is transforming experiences into gains. Yeah. And like I've spent a lot of time studying trauma, and a traumatic experience is basically when you go through a rough experience, and because the experience happened, you feel like you're worse off. So you feel like your current self is worse than your former self was because some event happened. Let's say something happens objectively, you lose your leg in a car accident. But if like what I love about the gain mindset, and I really think this is a fundamental mindset, is can you transform that experience into a gain? Can you transform that experience into learning, growth, value, and gratitude so that you actually feel like your current self is further along than your former self? And if you can learn how to do that, you create what we would call in psychology post-traumatic growth. And so I believe that this model, gap and gain, is the most useful, simple model for creating post-traumatic growth, or honestly, just for inflating the value of all experiences, transforming all experiences into gains. And so for me, it's a learning model as well. So those are my 2 cents at the moment.
Oh, I love that, Ben. Well, post-traumatic growth is powerful because people do experience setbacks. Entrepreneurs experience setbacks. I actually know someone who lost their leg in a horrible car accident, and he took the gain perspective. He's actually,
you've healed from it if you actually believe that the experience was a gain and that you have gained through the experience.
Yeah, and people in with really serious diagnoses, exactly the same thing. So that's as a learning model, I actually hadn't really.
I think the gap and the gain's a learning model. If you're not learning
which
from your
is
experiences,
amazing.
you're in the gap about it. But if you're learning and increasing the value of all experiences, as Dan would, like we talked about, you're either the passenger of your experiences where the experience happens to you, or you're the driver of the experience where you happen to the experience and you say, what does this experience mean? What's all the gains I can get out of it? How much juice can I squeeze out of it? And if you can gain huge amounts from even small experiences, you're going to keep getting better and better and better. Whereas if you're in the gap, you're measuring the experience against what you thought it should be. You're measuring the experience against some ideal. Why did this happen to me? Like, it's not, and that's why it's a trauma, is because you wish it hadn't happened and you think you're worse off as a result. And so you think you've gone backwards in some way. So you're in the gap.
Mm-hmm. Oh, that's amazing. So many things I could do with that. So what was, I'm just curious, because this is kind of a chance to get the inside scoop. What was the experience of writing the gap and the gain like for you? Because it wasn't, I know personally, because I was a little bit close to you guys. It wasn't always an easy experience.
Yeah. I knew it was going to be a challenging book to write because for at least two reasons. One is, so Who Not How was a pretty easy book to write compared to The Gap and the Gain for two reasons. One is it was so like, these books are they're sort of companion books. Actually, when I initiated the collaboration with Dan and when we realized it was going to be multiple books, I knew that there were three books I wanted to write initially. One was obviously Who Not How. I wanted to write a book called 10x is easier than 2x, just because that's a concept I love. And I wanted to write The Gap and the Gain. And me and Dan had conversations about it before we ever started The Gap and the Gain. We were kind of deciding the order. And Dan said, well, we should probably write The Gap and the Gain before 10x because you kind of need to understand the gap and the gain if you're going to go 10x, because if you don't understand the gap and the gain, then going 10x just becomes a perpetual painful process, because why go 10x if you're going to be in the gap about all the progress you make anyways, so we were very strategic in doing the gap and the gain second, because if you want to go 10x, which we invite people to do in any area of your life, 10xing your income or 10xing your freedom, 10xing your happiness, if you don't learn the gap and the gain, it really does not matter how much progress you make. You're always going to be comparing yourself to the ideal of your future self. And as Shannon said, the ideal is the horizon that keeps going, keeps staying further and further out of range. And in psychology, we call that the hedonic treadmill. And so there's no point in teaching people how to become more successful if they're always measuring their success against the next ideal. So I think that the gap and the gain is an essential mindset. But is there anything else? I mean, I can tell you anything you want about the actual writing process or about, we did have, breakdowns in the team where we all went into the gap about each other for a while. I will tell you, so like Who Not How was easy because number one, it was a fairly new idea for Dan at the time. Like obviously his whole company and strategic coach is built around self-managing teams and stuff, but the Who Not How kernel was completely fresh. In fact, he presented it almost for his first time ever when I first heard it. And I'm like, Dan, let's turn that into a book. And so it was so fresh. Yeah. And like, it was a new idea for me too. It wasn't as built around my psychology background that like, there wasn't that much stakes. Honestly, the stakes weren't that high with right. Who Not How. But with the gap and the gain, the stakes were high for me because for me, I mostly view the gap and the gain as a psychology book. And so like, I saw all the depth in the concept, but the stakes were really high for Dan and Babs because this is an idea that they've cherished and many strategic coach people have cherished for like going on 30 years. And so I was already mounting pressure on myself to write a really good book because this I felt like was more in my wheelhouse anyways. But whenever I would present drafts to them, I felt like they went into the gap a lot easier with this book than they did with Who Not How because they came from like 30 years of teaching this, thinking about it, owning it. And they're like, this is our baby. And so like, it was tough to actually like take the baby and say, this is now going to be a Benjamin Hardy book. And it took time for them to give me that freedom fundamentally. And because it's been so close to home for them for so long that it was painful for bits for all of us to write this book.
Yeah. But you got through it. And it's interesting because, it's easy to go in the gap, especially about things. If you have an ideal about something, it is super, super easy as opposed to looking at progress. And when you've got a really defined idea about what something should or should not be like. And Dan said the other day in the workshop that we were in, Ben, could, would, or should, all gap words, right?
Oh yeah,
Because they
100%.
all talk about ideals. But let's tie in the gap and the gain on who, not how, because thinking about those emotions, like we talk about, we're all very passionate about teams and about teamwork. And what happens when people are in the gap, to your example, teamwork breaks down. It's not good, right? It can end something, you can just fall apart. So to my mind, we're also all very passionate about culture. So Ben, I'd love to hear your thoughts about, and then we'll move to you, Alec, your thoughts about when people are, from a company perspective, from a team perspective, the the mindset. I love that you think it's as or more important than Carol Dweck's distinctions of fixed or growth mindset. What that mindset in a company means. Like, how does it play out if someone's in the gap versus someone's in the gain when they're working with someone else? What are your thoughts on that, Ben?
Yeah, I'll give a few contexts. Let me start with honestly a family context, and then we'll jump into like a business context. So if I'm always in the gap about myself, then I'm always measuring myself against where I think I should be. And I'm devaluing all the progress I've made up to this point, which, by the way, again, we all do this. High achievers are very prone to this. I remember when I wrote Willpower Doesn't Work, which was my first major book, and it didn't hit the New York Times bestseller list. And so because that was my measure, I felt like the whole thing was a failure. And I was in a depression for like 3 months because of that. It's really sad because it was a great book and a successful book. But if I'm in the gap about myself and I'm in the gap about my wife, my kids, and I'm only seeing, where they're not measuring up against where I think they should be, and that's all I'm doing is pointing out, why didn't you do that better? Or like, why aren't you doing the dishes or blah, blah, blah. Like if I'm only seeing where they're not doing anything and I'm not helping them see their own progress, then it's a toxic culture. It's a toxic place where everyone's just pointing out what's wrong with the situation. It's like the epitome of a negative and toxic environment. And so like, as one example, like, so we got our 3 oldest kids when they were 3, 5, and 7. They were foster kids. And our 7-year-old, like, by the way, the 5-year-old, when we got her, she could not count to 5. Like our 2-year-olds can count to 5. Our 2-year-olds can count to like 20. But like when the girl was 5, she could not count even to 5. She couldn't. But anyways, the 7-year-old could not read. He was actually held back in school multiple years. And I was sitting with him. We were trying to read these little books, and we spent months, years trying to help him just learn how to read. And obviously I had ideals for him back then for the 7-year-old version of him, like trying to get him to read and stuff like that. Fast forward today, he's almost 14 years old. These kids are so far along. But if I'm still in the gap about my son, all those steps along the way, I keep moving the benchmark of success for him. Oh, Caleb, you can't read. It's like, now, Caleb, why can't you do that math? Like, if I'm always pointing out where he's deficient, then he never actually sees how far he's come. And I'm not training him to see his own progress. I'm not training him how to build his own confidence. I'm not training. And so I make success impossible for everyone around me if I'm in the gap. And I also don't allow him to see the brilliance of all he's done to get to this point and all the freaking hard work that he's gone through to learn all the skills, abilities. And if I'm in the gain about him, then I actually help him to measure his own progress correctly, but also to create his own motivation and his own goals. And that's what we've recently done with him for tennis. Back when I was first starting the gap and the gain, I was in the gap a lot more than I am now. I still go in there plenty, but I remember we would first get him in tennis competitions and I would only see like where he could be doing better. I'm like, after a tennis match, I'd go and immediately start coaching him. Look, you could do this better. Like, rather than like, how are you doing now versus how you were doing like a week ago, or like, what are the things you learned and how did you get better? Just barely. But I've shifted over to just only gain conversations about tennis with him. Just like, how are you better now than you were last week? Or what did you learn from that match? And because we're just only in the gain about tennis, his confidence has skyrocketed. His motivation has skyrocketed. His skills have skyrocketed. He has so much more fun and he's more willing to like lose, try, take risks because it's no longer about him trying to be perfect. So I just think you can, I'll let Alec and I'll let you actually just translate whatever you want to into a business context. But I just think if you're never allowing people to measure their gains and actually pointing out the gains, then you have a toxic culture, and the culture is set up for failure every step of the way. And eventually no one wants to be there, because it's just not fun to be around a tyrant, essentially, who's not helping people feel successful. So that's what I'll say.
Oh my God. I actually had to like go find my papers. I had to write that down, like toxic culture. And if I make success impossible when I'm in the gap. That's
what you do, because you keep moving the measurement. It's always against your ideal. It doesn't matter how far they came or how many milestones they crossed or how many mountains they've summited. It doesn't really matter, because the next summit's the only thing that matters, and they're not there yet.
And right now, with people so concerned about retaining really great people, great who's, and attracting great who's, this is so critical. So right, it's like this is an incredibly relevant conversation, not just for who you are. And I really appreciate the parenting example, Ben, because who isn't in the gap about their kids sometimes. I can tell you my own stories. Really
a million.
I know.
I think it's a brilliant mindset for business, though. Pointing out gains, having people like, we have a text group in my business because it's all virtual. And I'm like, every week it's like, share your gains, share your progress, share your growth. They all have meetings and they talk about it. And it's good to reward people for their achievements. And that obviously boosts motivation, but it also boosts their sense that they are valued, they're cared about, and what they're doing actually matters.
I love
and
that.
They're better than they were a month ago. They're way better at their job than they were 3 months ago. Like, you help them see their improvements and want more improvements.
Yeah. And I just started with a brand new person. So and we call it 21-day positive focus, but exactly that. So Alec, let's jump to this, because you're very conscious of this in your hiring process with people when you profile them. So why don't you jump in and share your thoughts about the GAIN culture and GAIN team members?
Awesome. Well, this is great. What a great transition to talk about how this impacts us personally, and now how it can impact our businesses. So we're learning about life-changing things right now. And so I want to go on a limb and say, this is going to change your life as well. So we've all heard the expression from Peter Drucker, business guru, culture eats strategy for breakfast. And so when you have a healthy culture, when your employees in the game, when you as a leader are in the game, it's going to increase the job satisfaction of your employees. And happier employees mean that they're more productive. Happier employees mean, and more productive employees mean that there's more profit, increases in client experiences. So that's super important, a reason to have a healthy culture. Secondly, entrepreneurs and leaders must be in the GAIN. Entrepreneurs and leaders must commit to being in the GAIN and building healthy culture, because it retains your superstars. It retains talent. And when you can retain your superstars, they're going to promote your business. It's going to attract more talent, and you'll be able to hire from a larger pool of superstars. And so thus your return on investment increases. Right. So how do you do that? How do you actually hire for employees who are in the GAIN mindset? So number one, you have to commit to it, and you have to hire only employees that are in the GAIN mindset. So how do you do that? You evaluate with behavioral interview questions. So I'm going to read to you 3 or 4 questions that are questions you can ask when interviewing talent on how to be in the GAIN. So number one, and this is, so Vision Spark, we evaluate leaders for our clients. And so these are leadership-based questions. So as a leader, and don't worry about writing these down, because we're going to send them to you in the show notes here. So as a leader, how important is it for you to have a positive environment in the workplace? And if it's important, then you ask, what do you do to create and maintain a positive environment? Here's another one. Your team has achieved a major goal. How do you feel about having a celebration? And then you can follow up with, tell me about a time when you celebrated with your team. Here's a really good one. You've begun a new leadership position. The current team is mired in a negative environment. Tell me what you will do to develop a positive environment. Here's a fourth one here. Do you believe, and this can be done with not just leadership positions, but with anybody you're hiring. Do you believe that your team members would describe you with positive words? Tell me some words they would use. What would you have done that causes them to see you as positive? So those are just some examples of interview questions. And when you're asking those questions, really be listening to specific examples. If they start talking theory and, it seems like a question that they've Googled and memorized, you want to look for real examples that, that adds credibility. So those are some things that entrepreneurs and leaders can do to improve their culture. So if there's one thing I want you to take away is from this point forward, only hire new employees that are in the game. And so here at VisionSpark, here are some things we do culturally to help our company to be in the game. So number one, every Monday morning, we have a team huddle with the employees in the company, and we ask them to share 1 or 2 wins from the previous week. What were 1 or 2 wins from the previous week? And it begins the week with positivity. And it increases their confidence, increases their overall job satisfaction. And then practically, we begin every meeting with a positive focus. And we say, hey, who's got good news? And we have everyone share good news. And it could be personally or professionally, but it just gets the ball rolling there. And then the last thing we have is that we believe so much in this, and this was even before I learned about the gap in the gain during my time as strategic coach. But it's one of our core values. One of our core values is look to the positive in every situation. So as entrepreneurial companies, we're small, we get setbacks, and how can we be in the game here? How can we see the positive in this situation? So those are some things that we do here at VisionSpark. And culture, eat strategy for breakfast, hire employees who are only in the game. Emily Morgan is going to take it over from here. Emily's the visionary of Delegate Solutions, and she's going to continue the discussion.
Thanks, guys. So I'm looking at this concept, having been in coach for a long time as well. I'm looking at this concept from a delegation lens, of course. So when I think about this, I think about what I like to call elevation, right? So I believe that the world needs us elevated, right? And our ability to elevate ourselves directly correlates with the impact that we can actually make. And in order to actually figure out what we're here to do and make progress against it, we need this gain mindset. So when we're running our entrepreneurial companies, I think that we have such an opportunity to make such a massive impact. And we, meaning the world, needs you focused on that one thing that you can bring unique ability, unique talent, your unique contribution to, and lots of energy. And so staying in this gain mindset really helps us keep focused on elevating type behaviors. And what's interesting, conversely, when we take the position of, hey, I'm just going to do it myself, we're keeping ourselves and our teams in a really solid gap mindset. So to me, delegation is the number one tool that you can use to increase your elevation and stay in a gain type of environment. And as entrepreneurs, we've found ourselves, I think, keeping a death grip on work that others can do because we just can't let go. And in our work, we fight this battle like every single day with the entrepreneurs we work with. And I just also wrote a book that is called A Culture of Delegation. And the first third of that book is about mindset and all of the weird crap that's in our head with delegation that has absolutely nothing to do with delegation. Because a lot of the times, we have grown accustomed to attributing our value and our contribution to how busy we are, what's our output, but really it's about what our impact should be. And entrepreneurs can spend our entire careers there because it becomes really safe and comfortable, and we feel useful and needed and valuable. And, as our teams grow, we can start to really become the hero, and we get this sort of energy and rush from solving problems and putting out fires. And it keeps everyone in the gap. So delegation is a tool that you can use to get you and your team out of the gap because you're going to empower your team. Go ahead, Shannon.
Emily, just, you know what, just yes to everything that you're saying. And to the point of, if there's you're doing something that you're not great at, that doesn't give you energy, that doesn't feed you, it is really hard to be in the game. Like
Right.
because you're feeling a sense of failure because you're trying it and it ain't working. Right. So I think what you're saying is so profound, and give ourselves the permission really to do only those things that have the impact, that elevate you and other people when you do them. At Coach, we call that unique ability. I just did a podcast on it actually this morning, but that is so critical. And then delegate, find your who's. That is so critical to the success of your company. Being a rugged individual does not pay off. That is a lousy recipe for teamwork, and you and your team will never, ever elevate and have the impact that you want. So just want to emphasize that because I think it's so key. Thank you.
Yeah. And I think, if we're so busy executing, who's innovating in our companies? And if we're not really great at the execution, Mark O'Donnell, who was my coach for a long time, taught me that, if there's no visionary, there's a vacuum. And so our ability to elevate our time as the entrepreneurial leaders of our companies into a visionary type state. And to me, it's also been about having a really strong mindset and taking time to take care of that mindset. And being able to shift our own thinking around valuing the ideas that we have over the tasks that we actually do. So if I leave you with anything today, it's just more thought-provoking conversation around how to elevate your time. And to Ben's point and Dan's point from the book, talking about measurement, we created, as part of the book that I just wrote, it's a elevation scorecard. And we took the habits and mindsets of elevated leaders, and you can score yourself 1 to 10 based on how you're doing. You can have your team score you. You can take it today and then take it in a month after you've worked on this and see progress and growth, which will help keep you in the game. And it allows you to sort of pinpoint different parts so it's not so overwhelming to feel like I can't get out of the gap. These are really succinct habits and mindsets that you can dial into to either work on or sort of let go of. And I will put that in the chat right now so you can have access to it.
Awesome. I mean, every time I look at scoring, I'm like, oh, that'd be good. Oh, that's scary. But it does tell you how you can be very specific about the next gains that you want to make. So that's fabulous. Oh, this is so exciting. Just to wrap up, because I know we're going to go to questions soon, which will be really fun. As Alec, as you were talking about, positive, we do the positive focus at Coach a lot, and our very first value of our, is actually positive and collaborative teamwork. That's the P. So we're all on the same page. That's ours. But we have the fun cartoonist who does it. But so we encourage and cultivate a culture of collaboration, respect, and positivity that enhances unique ability teamwork. So we are on the same page, which is awesome.
I love it. And one of our behaviors that we have underneath that core value. So it's important to have those core values and then kind of list what behaviors you like, what you prefer. And so one of our subs for that core value is to see the gold in others, right? So it's so easy to judge and to criticize and look to see what you don't like about others. But if you can see the gold in others, that's really, really key. So that's part of our core value. I love that you guys have that as well. So Kate, you probably are monitoring the chat and there's probably some questions there.
Yeah, absolutely. And I would add one thing, I think I'm the only leader on this panel. Everyone else is entrepreneurial, owners, visionaries. I would say, another coach concept that I think adds to the culture tremendously is ownership thinking. And and that may be a whole next webinar series for us, right, guys? But if we, really can work on vetting candidates and new team members that have that ownership thinking, it's going to create that positive culture. So I just wanted to throw that in there because it's something we talk a lot about at Vision Spark.
Love it. Yes.
All right. So yes, we do have some questions, and feel free to keep those coming in. We have a couple that came in before when we sent out the the webinar information. And so we've got a couple from there. And I'm going to start out with one going right to Dr. Hardy. So Ben, it's been a tremendously difficult time as we've gone through the last, 18 months or so. And, you probably didn't have any idea that was coming as you guys launched, the book. So is there something that when there's great times of struggle, whether that's collectively or even individually, is there like a gap and gain on steroids that we should be doing?
I think that with, like, for example, the pandemic, or if you're going through something really difficult as a family or as a business, it's a really good opportunity to turn the experience into a gain. I think as an example, I know that Dan, as one example with his company, took the pandemic as an opportunity to really take the company digital, which was probably, it will facilitate the next 10x jump for Strategic Coach. And that would not have been facilitated had the pandemic not happened. But obviously it was their mindset and the context with which they looked at the pandemic. They looked at it from a gain perspective. How can we turn this into a gain? How can we use this so that it's happening for us, not happening to us? So there's a great quote actually from Will Durant. Will Durant was a famous historian. And he says, the ability of the average person could be doubled if the situation demanded it. And so I think that, it's a great opportunity when you're going through something difficult. Obviously, it's painful in the moment, but if you can actually take it with a gain mindset and turn it into a gain rather than being paralyzed by it. And when you're in the gap, you become paralyzed because you're essentially just wishing it was something else rather than actually approaching it. In psychology, we talk about how there's like really two orientations toward motivation. You either have an approach orientation or you have an avoid orientation. When you have an avoid orientation, you're kind of just like avoiding it. But if you're approaching it, for example, approaching the problem, approaching the situation and actually saying, all right, how can we actually use this to our benefit? What can we learn from this? How can we actually use this to pivot or become more flexible or more? So I think it's a great opportunity. I mean, I think there's a famous quote that says, never let never let a crisis go to waste. And so it's really up to you how you respond to the situation. And, the pandemic is a great opportunity, and it's a great example of a crazy episode that occurred, and some people have turned it into gains and other people have gone into the gap and been paralyzed by it. So it's really just a stimulus for whatever you want to do with it. But I think with really difficult situations, it can be a massive stimulus for growth if you have a gain mindset.
Thank you. Yeah, all my little quotes here. Never let a crisis go to waste. I'm taking out my whole notebook here. All right. So Shannon, you mentioned, but anybody could jump in here. There were gap words that you mentioned that I think Dan had talked about: could, would, should.
Yes.
Are there gain words that we can be flipping it to? Or is that something that you discuss around coach, or anybody can feel free to jump in here, but I think that would be good as we start to hear ourselves say those things.
That's awesome. I've never been asked that question before. That's a really good question. Gain words. To my mind, it's anything that is a progress. So we've learned this. We now know this. This is progress versus perfection. And Ben, hopefully some words are coming to mind for you too. But I think anytime we do that, have learned, got, received, benefited from, all of those kind of positive things are what I go to. I'm actually trying to figure out what I have written in my positive focus because I do one every day. That's what I've, things I've accomplished, things I've received, things I'm happy about, but again, it's not as simple as could, would, should.
Yeah.
But those are kind of things that occur to me. I'm curious to see what other people's words are, because again, that's a really insightful question.
Anyone else on the team have any thoughts on that? I don't know if I love the question too. I actually, no words immediately came to my mind, although I think I like the idea of learned, transformed, grew. So yeah, accomplished, learned. There's some great words in there from James, actually. Just like what's changed, what's actually gotten better, what's different, what's, evolved is even a good word. But, if you're looking at the gain, you're actually paying attention to what has grown or what's changed or what's evolved. Whereas if you're in the gap, you're actually assuming that things are still the same, even though they're not. So I just think words around like learned, changed, accomplished, grew.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I've been using that technique with my team. Anytime there's an experience that goes wrong, obviously we're using experience transformers, but it's like, what did we learn from this? Like, we just spent money, whether we hired someone, it wasn't a right fit or whatever. We just spent money on this. What did we actually learn? from it. And I think that sort of thinking keeps the team out of the gap mindset as well, because it's all about, okay, well, we just keep moving. What did we learn from it? What did we learn from it?
Yeah, the experience transformers are great to use. It's a coach tool for sure. That's awesome. Thank you so much. I had somebody say the other day, instead of apologizing, say thank you. So instead of saying sorry for being late, say thank you for waiting for me.
Yes,
Yeah.
I love that.
That was great. All right.
I
Okay.
want to, Kate, before you jump to the next question, there's something though I want to kind of highlight something that a couple of you have been saying, and that is it's a stimulus response, like how we respond to the circumstance, but also like taking ownership of it. Instead of it happening to you, you're actually going, okay, I'm in this situation, I'm going to choose how I respond. Did a fun podcast with Dan the other day for that. And again, but when we appreciate the experience, we give value to it. When your stocks appreciate, they go up. When we appreciate a circumstance, when we appreciate what we do have versus what we don't, this is a lot of what Dan and I did together in scary times at the beginning of the pandemic. What do you have? What is still true? And to really actually own and appreciate that means we give it value, and as opposed to just avoiding it, to your point, Ben, and wishing it were different, which means we've ignored all of the learning that was possible. All of it. It's just, we've just thrown it out with the trash. Whereas in fact, there's gold in there to your point, Alec. So I just think that, having a different perspective on the experience means it can be so much richer. And then people who don't do that, and that's all of us at some points, we're losing out on the opportunity to gain an enormous amount because we're not appreciating that opportunity. So just wanted to throw that in there because I think it's us taking ownership of our experience and appreciating it, super important.
Yeah, that's great. So John has a question. I'll paraphrase it a little bit, but advice for new entrepreneurs that are setting small goals, which may not be, ideal, right? Setting the small goals, but what if we're still struggling to meet them? Should we change those goals, or is that going into the gap? Can we talk about that? Maybe goal setting and not meeting versus meeting.
I have so many things I could say about this. Ben, you've actually studied goal setting a lot and have a lot to say about it. So I'm curious as to your take.
Yeah. Just a few quick thoughts on it. One is, obviously you want to have a big vision, but I think having small daily goals is really nice. Like, you have it really small, have it doable. Like as an example, let's just say you have 3 items on your to-do list. I would actually invite anyone on here to have smaller daily goals, because if your goals are too big on a daily basis, you may just procrastinate doing it. It's trying to eat too much of the elephant at once. So give yourself smaller daily goals that you can actually commit to accomplishing. But let's just say you actually had 3 goals and you only nailed 2 of them. Just as an example for me today, I didn't nail all my morning goals today. Now it's up to me if I want to go in the gap about it and say, oh, I didn't knock down all my goals, so I'm just going to frame today as a failure, and I'm going to feel like a loser, and I'm going to beat myself up about it because, I'm going to be the whipping boy to myself essentially. And it's really about like, why would you want to frame your past as negative? Why would I want to frame today as a failure? What's that going to do for my confidence? What's that going to do for future me? It's not going to do anything for future me. Like we've already talked about, there's so much research. Your current self being happy here and now and measuring yourself properly and seeing the gains is what you're going to do to boost your confidence and motivation the most. So let's just say I had 3 items on my to-do list and I only nailed 2. I get to decide what my gains were. I get to decide how I learned today. So it's really about how you frame it. You still can find ways that you're further along than your former self. And so it's about finding that progress, creating that progress, and then using that to make better progress. So the goal is that you're always framing your past from a gain perspective. You're always recognizing and seeing how you're further along. You're always learning lessons from today, even if it didn't go exactly how you wanted it to, so that you're framing the past and today as positive, and that will boost you for tomorrow. So I would argue it's okay if you didn't hit your goal. If you're trying to just obsess on, oh, you missed it, be mad at yourself or be angry at yourself, that's not going to help you. So like instead, what did you learn? How, what can you learn to be better for tomorrow?
Love that.
Yeah.
All right.
Dan also has a fun expression. He goes, there's no such thing as an unrealistic goal, only an unrealistic deadline. So sometimes if you push it out, it's very doable, right? So sometimes you might need to modify the timeline. Dr. Robert Moore talks about one small step that can change your life. He goes, do you take the smallest first action that doesn't trigger your fear response? Because otherwise, as Ben said, you procrastinate, right? So what is the smallest first thing? I love those ideas of what, like the daily ones, Ben, that you have confidence about. Do that, and that'll beget the next one and the next one and the next one.
I'll also say this is my really ugly tracking sheet right now. One of my goals is to film 50 YouTube videos before the end of the year. I just have this ugly video, like, see, film 50. I've got, every time I do one, I give myself a little bullet, you know what I mean? So I think I've got 8 right now, and I've done 8 in the last like week. I've got until the end of the year to film 50. So every time I actually do one, I literally just stick a dot there, and I'm seeing my progress. I'm seeing my gains, but also if I set the goal to do 5 in one day, I'm likely to get none. But if I set the goal to do 1 a day, I will likely get 2 or 3. And so, that's just kind of how motivation works. Give yourself super small, short-term goals, make it so easy that you can actually commit to doing it and make progress on a daily basis. Obviously, it compounds over time.
Love that. And visual, and like you can see it. So good.
Very old school. I like it.
Yeah. And just being a part of Strategic Coach and love helping companies hire great who's, if you're having trouble reaching your goals, do you have the right people in the right seats? Do you have the right team members? And it could be a full-time employee, it could be a vendor. So that can really help you achieve your goals.
It could be an assistant through Delegate Solutions, right?
There you go.
All right. Speaking of that, if we're looking for possible additional ideas on interviewing maybe non-leaders, but other team members with questions that can help us determine if they're in the gain. And Alec, this would be great for you to, jump on. And Ben, if you've had some inspiration, through this, sometimes an outside perspective is great.
So another good question that you can ask is, if they're currently employed and they're interviewing with your organization, you could say, please describe your current employer and coworkers, right? Ask them to describe it. And if they go in a tizzy and start really ripping on them, oh, I can't stand my boss, oh, this one employee, I mean, that is an immediate response. And, at Vision Spark, we say the best time to fire a bad employees before they're even hired. So fire them right then and there. Don't even let them in the door.
That is such a good clue. It didn't occur to me, but if someone's a complainer, they're going to be complaining about you in about 3 seconds. Yeah. So that is such a good clue. Thank you, Alec. Good one.
Yeah, I think the other question here that kind of relates is, when we've got, when it comes to current employees and leaders in the organization, and where we know that they're not in the gain, when do you maybe release them from that position and start looking for some other employees?
That's a great question.
That's not a softball.
That's not a softball question. Well, one is, I think it's easier if you have a core value around being in the game. And then what you can do is when they kind of cross that line or kind of dip their toe at it, you can give a specific example saying, hey, our core value is this, and this behavior, and you don't ever want to say you're this way, but your behavior really did not demonstrate our core value. And so if you do that 3 times or so, and they don't improve, then it's time for them to move on. So what do we say? We liberate them to their next
liberate. That's the new word.
Assignment. Yes. Yeah.
All right. Go ahead, Ben. Did you have something else?
Yeah, I would just kind of say I'm a huge believer that obviously culture shapes mindsets, culture shapes behavior. And so if there's not a culture of gain going on, I would push that on the leader and just say, your people are the byproduct of the culture you've designed. And so, you can train, one of my favorite quotes is, if you do not create and control your environment creates and controls you. So I just think it's kind of like the idea that in order for a leader to get respect, like if a leader really wants respect from their followers, the best way to do that is to give respect to their followers. It's just like, if you want to gain trust, you have to give trust. And so the easiest way to help people actually get into the gain is just help them see their own gains. Like, you as the leader, help them see the gain. Like, I've recently been told, like, what do you do if you have like this teenager who's just a total rat? You know what I mean? Like, like parents who are just struggling with like a teenager who's like, this teen is just rough, and like, I'm like, well, what if the parent just helped that teen see their own gains? Like, right? Like help them actually like see their progress and actually point that out more regularly. I think it has a dramatic impact. And so although yes, we do have problem children that, sometimes they do need to go. Often they're really just the byproduct of the culture that we've created. And so if we can help them see their own gains, help them experience that and help them see that, often that can correct the course in of itself. Obviously, sometimes if people are just not gonna, if they're just gonna be rough, it becomes obvious if someone doesn't fit.
Yeah,
Yeah.
Ben, I love that because, that quote that says you can teach what you know, but you replicate who you are, right? So if you're an entrepreneur that is constantly in the gap, you're going to probably have employees that are in the gap, right? So that's why we need to commit to the change.
And you have to see whether or not it's temporary and very situational or if it's kind of chronic, right? And so that's why I wrote multiplication by subtraction, because it helps you identify what the clues are. Is it in the affective, realm? Is it in the how they're striving? Is it a misfit for the role? Is it a learning or cognitive misfit in some way? And oftentimes it's actually the person, they could get moved and they'll be where they were not successful before and in the gap a lot because they weren't good at it. They'll turn into an amazing gain team member. You're like, wow, I didn't even picture that was possible. And then a few times, especially when people aren't striving or don't share your values, then they need to be gracefully exited back to the marketplace so they can find a new opportunity. But people don't fire themselves. So you really do have to be the one to kind of have that conversation or put the book on their desk is what some of my clients have done, which is pretty funny.
But if you're in a gain mindset, even if there's a rough situation, you can take ownership of it rather than it happening to you. It can happen for you and you can learn from it. You can turn it into a gain. You can use it to maybe better assess your hiring process or your culture process or anything. So even if something's going wrong and it does lead to you needing to terminate or something like that, you as a leader should be able to help not only yourself and your team be in the gain, but hopefully you can help that person on the way out turn that experience into a gain so that they can be better, not bitter as well.
Better, not bitter. Ooh, that's nice.
All right, Courtney McHugh has a really wonderful reminder here. Instead of saying I have to do something, I get to do it. So not I have to, go to my L10 meeting. I get to go to my L10 meeting, things like that, just something simple. And then she also asked about tracking goals. It's more of an implementation question. What are some simple ways or tools to track progress on your personal and professional goals so that when I do go into the gap, I can be quickly into the gain and grateful for the specific progress? Well, what we saw, I guess, Courtney, is that Ben has something really fancy, and that's bullet points on a sheet of paper. But is there anything else that we can be maybe making suggestions on? And then we have just, have to wrap up here because we're hitting the top of the hour.
I can share quickly. So we use a scorecard and we track every week if we're on track or off track, because so much of our work and so much of, I think, goals and feeling like you've moved the needle on something is very subjective. So being able to make it more objective, like, okay, in order for me to do this, these 5 things have to be true or something like that. And then tracking against an actual objective thought, taking the goal and making it actually into something that has steps and deadlines and making them micro steps, and then just tracking your progress. And we use just like a Google sheet to do that type of thing.
Well, thank you. All right, guys. Well, I just am super excited to announce that we've got some folks to send out some books to. Alexis, Courtney, Lori, Robin, and John will coordinate with getting you guys some books. So appreciate that. We'll connect with you via the chat here. And we just want to say thank you so very much to Dr. Ben Hardy for joining us. Congratulations on all the success that you've had on your book. We've gained so much wisdom. I think we can have an entire, quotes sheet sent out on the quotes that we gained today. And thanks so much to Emily and Alec and Shannon. And if you loved what you heard here, we are hanging out every quarter doing these fireside chats, gaining more information on entrepreneurial freedom and leadership experiences. So you can go ahead and register for the next one. Perhaps we'll be doing ownership thinking, right? Thanks so much for joining us and have a great rest of the day.
Thanks, everyone. And if you want to pick up the book on Kindle, it's really reasonable right now. It's crazy.
99 cents.
Yeah, and I highly recommend the Audible book. It is, as you said, Ben, life-changing. It has brought a lot of people to tears because it's moved them so much. When you realize how much you've been in the gain and how much that's impacted the people around you, and the opportunity, or when you've been in the gap and the opportunity to be in the gain, it's profound. This book has the opportunity to shift millions and millions of people's lives. So let's
Yeah,
get the word out.
huge thanks to I think it's Courtney McHugh who said that the Audible is good. I really do think, obviously the Kindle is 99 cents right now, but if you're, and the book is really, obviously it's gorgeous. We want to make sure that the interior was really easy to read, really beautiful, but the Audible book is the full experience. There's 2.5 bonus hours of interviews between me and Dan. And yeah, I just really think once you actually get it, like some people have said, wow, I've been estranged from my family for decades. And now I finally know how to reapproach that situation and turn it into a gain because I realized I've been in the, and there's just so much healing that can happen, but also, from like a strategic standpoint, as we've talked about, learning to measure on progress, getting more specific about it, it really helps you to make more progress. So it's been a huge pleasure. You guys all have a great day. It was a lot of fun. And thanks to everyone who's sharing comments and who got to chill with us. It was fun.
That was great. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.